All right, people. Hide your wives, hide your children. Tonight is going to be a good one. Let me just wait for the standard Fs to drop in the chat to let me know that everything is working perfectly and the audio is beautiful. Okay. This is going to be like every sidebar is unique and special. And I don't want to say that some are more unique than special than others because they're all unique and special. This one is going to be as unique and as special as all the other ones. What I love about these sidebars and guests that until a few days ago I have never heard of, and I don't mean that in any pompous way. Like there's just the internet is huge, and there are gems and there are quality creators out there that I just don't know about. And you know, Robert comes to me and says, let's do Nerdrotic, let's do Doomcock, and now let's do Rageaholic. And I go into these binges where I discover new content, and it's glorious and it's beautiful. And discovering this new content, the beautiful thing is when you discover content you didn't know you needed until you discovered it existed. And I've been watching Rageaholic a lot over the last 2 days, and it's classic stuff. I mean, it's classic stuff in the sense that you may not like swear words, you may not like the shock humor. I happen to have a dirty sense of humor, a sort of a edgy sense of humor in what I watch in terms of movies and stand-up. I love stand-up. I love, seller stand-up. I love when the world was free and we could actually cross the border without having to be subjected to quarantine hotels upon our return. I used to like going to New York and going to stand-up shows. I mean, I love stand-up. And listening to Rageaholic, it's like stand-up meets Styx Hexenhammer. And incidentally, I tweeted that out earlier and did not know that apparently Rageaholic and Styx Hexenhammer are good friends. I was listening to Rageaholic and I say, this is like Styx meets Bill Burr. And then in doing my homework on Rageaholic, I discovered that his influences are Dennis Leary, and now I see Dennis Leary a lot more than Bill Burr. So while everyone trickles in to the streams, because YouTube has been so good with the notifications that people get them sometimes 6 days late for a live stream. YouTube has been so good on the way the channel's been functioning that it takes people 3 likes to actually click like, by the way. So this is going to be a good one. We're going to get Razor in a second. Standard disclaimers. First of all, I should always remember to say this. We should be live on Rumble. So let me make sure that we are. I hope. I don't see an error symbol. No, I see that video. Okay, someone tell me if we're live on Rumble. We should be live on Rumble. Super chats. I'm going to do my best to get to all of them. If I don't get to them, don't be miffed. If you're going to be miffed, don't give it. I don't like people feeling bad or feeling like I have, what's the word? Not shilled, but rather grifted them. I hate that word. I like grafted better, which actually in England means work hard, which I do. So that's it. YouTube takes 30%. So if that shocks your conscience and you want to support the channel, you can get us on vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You can get me on Patreon and subscribe to it, but I might be winding those things down anyhow and just directing everyone to Locals because it's where the content is. No legal advice. There will be some swearing, I presume, during this. So my children's friends, if you're watching, get your earmuffs ready. All right, good reference. First movie reference, I believe that was Wedding Crashers? Whatever. Okay, now, Robert's in. Rageaholic is in, or Razorfist is in. I'm going to bring everyone in. Let me bring Robert in first. Robert, how you doing?
Good.
Are you as excited for this as I am?
Yeah, it'll be fun.
All right, and now we are bringing in Razorfist, who is going to come on the right. Then I'm going to, you know what, hold on a second. Before we do it, we'll do this. And then we do this. And now we are all together, people. Razorfist, how you doing?
Good. Of course, I'm always coming in on the right. What are you talking about? All right.
No,
I'm like a one-legged unicyclist pulling 90 down the Autobahn. I'm slightly far to the right.
Okay, we're going to get into where the memory bank of analogies and expressions you use. First question I was going to have was, are you going to come in black and white? And we have an answer to that question. So you're coming in black and white from the right, like a person on it, whatever you just said 30 seconds ago. Okay, Rageaholic, introduce us who don't know who you are. Who are you? I know a bit about you, and I'm going to get into your history and your childhood, but give everyone a 30-second rundown before we dive into your childhood.
My childhood. Okay, we'll get to that year at summer camp with the Catholic priest. But no, I'm Razorfist. Let's see. I started doing this YouTube thing in about 2009. It was a slow growth process, which tends to happen when you use analogies with heavy pepperings of the C word for a long, protracted period of time. I find it does tend to hamper your commercial prospects a little bit, but I don't know. Gradually over time, I'm kind of like the Motorhead of YouTube. I just kind of keep going, and gradually it just starts to grow of its own accord, essentially.
So you're 35 years old, 35 years young.
No, not right now. No, there's a lot of false information about me on the interwebs.
Okay, may I ask your age?
But I am about to have my my birthday, incidentally, on the 31st, and I'll let you know I'll be close to that.
Okay, but you're on the younger side of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now I don't know how much you don't want to get into, but. I watched one video, I watched a bunch, but one that explained your childhood. Where are you from? How many siblings do you have? What did your parents do? And
what did they do?
Yeah, give everyone the overall, because it'll help people understand how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah. Were there any toxic waste dumps near your home? Was there? No. I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a native Arizonan, which I think all native Arizonans are from LA now, is actually how that works. But half of my family is originally from Pennsylvania. And so every now and then you'll catch me say, how about dat? And stuff like that. Now, I have a little bit of a Pittsburgh accent that'll creep in every now and then because my mother's from Erie. But other than that, native Arizonan. And I got into this. I went to school for political science and broadcasting. Went to a famous broadcasting school out here, a broadcasting school of national repute. Not that it necessarily deserves the distinction, but I wound up getting into political radio. I did kind of a podcast before podcasts were a thing. It was like 2002. And I wanted to do internet radio because that was a thing that was happening on Lycos. just to carbon date myself for a moment. On Lycos, there was this internet radio craze. And of course, I started an internet radio show just in time for them to shut down the internet radio on Lycos. So I'm like, well, what should we do there? I had a broadcasting partner who I now do a podcast with, incidentally. He goes by Tactical Hobo online. Anyways, we decide to do this thing, and the only way we could figure to do it was let's record it ahead of time. I knew how to edit on MP3, and then we'll just put it up for people to download. iPods didn't exist, but it was a podcast. You know what I mean? People would download it and then listen to it later. And that kind of became the roots of what I do now, with the occasional political commentary, with a righteous slathering of dick jokes thrown on top.
Now, what was your parents' occupations?
My father is two things. He is an ordained minister. He's a music minister, and he's both of my parents were public school teachers.
So is that where your interest in music came from?
In music? No, I grew up hating music. I hated it a lot. It sounds autistic, but I hated music itself. It's funny. I had to grow into it. When I became, a young adult, or not a young adult, I'd say teenager, I started getting, you get your own taste in music, whatever. And I wound up starting a bunch of bands. I was in a thrash punk band for a minute. And then that turned into a hardcore band, which turned into a metal band, and, on and on and on. So, I wound up loving music, but I hated it when I was growing up, probably because I was, around hymnals and such all the time. So
let me get this. Your dad is a minister.
Mm-hmm.
What on earth does he think about what you're doing right now? At the very least, the language you use, which might be more shocking to some than to others.
Yeah, he doesn't sound that different when he stubs his toe. I got to be honest. We're not so different, you and I.
So now, VIVA's more of a metal fan. than I am.
Really?
How early on did you get into metal?
God, I got into heavy metal backwards. You know how normally you'd have that friend in the 80s or something? I didn't, but you would have that friend who would start out, but they'd have the gateway drug bands. Oh, I listened to an AC/DC song today. This is fantastic. You know what I mean? And then a few months later, they're listening to Slayer, Rain and Blood and flashing the devil horns. And this is kind of how it goes. It's like a slow process of progressing to more aggressive hardcore stuff. I went totally in reverse. I got into not just black metal, but like obscure black metal first. And then I worked my way backward to get to the classic stuff, which I'm still doing. I'm slowly getting into it's my taste in music is softening as time goes on. But I still listen to all that stuff.
Just so the internet doesn't start any rumors, I'm not much into heavy metal. I was into Blink. I mean, I'm still into Blink and some of the punk rock.
That's a shame.
I think the heaviest I ever got into was Metallica and maybe to a lesser degree Def Leppard. And what's the other one? AC/DC. But
right.
No, that's okay. No, so let's see this. You went to broadcast school, which would explain you have a good radio voice. You have an amazing elocution, I think is the word, or enunciation.
Yeah.
How many years in broadcast school? Did you graduate and try to look for a job, or
it was not for me? It was not for me. I've told the story before. When I was there, I got fine grades. It was not that at all. I was actually engaged by the curriculum. I found it interesting that a lot of it was a little more applicable, but I literally it was a big red pill for, okay, now I understand why journalists are the way they are. You know what I mean? It was like it was the supervillain origin story of Anderson Cooper is what it was when I went there, because it was, well, first off, I did the smart thing. I did the community college thing to get the electives out of the way. And then I jumped over to, the university to go actually do the broadcasting school thing. But I found I enjoyed the junior college a lot more, and the university was not what it was cracked up to be. And I literally had an instance where, I forget the exact particulars, but it was something to the effect of, you needed to find a way to insert or some kind of editorial, arrangement. And so there had to be an opinion to it, is my point. And even then, I was right of Mussolini. So I naturally inserted my political opinions into it. And I kept getting the professor coming back to me with, oh, you need to change this. And it started to sound like nitpicking. It happened like 3 or 4 times. It was like nitpicking and nitpicking and nitpicking. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, I'm an okay writer. I just had a book published, by the way. So I'm a decent-ish. What's up?
What's the book? You got to let everyone know where can they get it?
Oh, you can go to nightvalenovels.com. It's a pulp. I'm a big fan of pulp fiction and dark, it's sword and sorcery meets film noir is what it is.
And you mean Pulp Fiction, the source material, not just the film?
Yeah, not the overrated Tarantino flick. But no, I
never even understood the title. Is how little I know about the actual Pulp Fiction, and I still don't get the reference of the title to the movie. But
right, Pulp Fiction. Do you like Conan? That's Pulp Fiction.
The Barbarian.
Like Philip Marlowe, film noir movies, the old bogey movies in black and white, all that stuff is the literary basis for all that stuff is.
Yeah, it goes back to the teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s. The
Shadow. I do a podcast about The Shadow, that kind of stuff. So yeah, like all that. So I'm even at that point, I knew how to write is my point. So I'm thinking, what am I doing wrong here? Finally, the lady comes out and just says, if you're going to slant, I think it was the issue itself that kind of set her off. I think she got a little triggered. And because at the time it was a contentious local issue, there was a bill being passed or proposed at the time in Phoenix called the Protect Arizona Now Initiative 2004. It was the predecessor to SB 1070, the big immigration law that was so controversial. The SB 1070 happened because PAN 2004 passed by an overwhelming margin, and then it wasn't enforced. So everyone had to then pass SB 1070. Anyway, so that was going on, and I inserted my opinion. And she finally came back with, well, if you're going to talk about this sensitive issue, you really need to consider the other side. basically in so many words was like, if you're going to slant your opinion or you're going to slant your article, you really need to slant it to the left because that's the most inclusive way. I remember those words. So that's the way that you don't leave anyone out. And I was like, what?
So literally, without not trying to pigeonhole you, just let everyone understand you've always been to the right. You get into a school.
As long as I was politically aware, I was more right of center, I would say, politically. But I didn't necessarily hold all of the current belief. You evolve over time.
Understood. But so you are politically to the right. You get into an industry which is, even at the time, we're 2004, which is traditionally, historically, always been quite to the left.
Yeah, and I knew that. I listened to talk radio at that time. I didn't want to get into that industry incidentally. I wanted to get in talk radio. And I was really inspired. It was probably my biggest. You talked about how I was inspired by Dennis Leary. He is one of the inspirations, but like Michael Savage was a big inspiration for me. As encountering him was like a shotgun blast to the face. Only I'm not a successful grunge singer. So, anyways, like Michael Savage, huge for me, and I wanted to basically be a young Michael Savage, and I went to broadcasting school for that reason. Not realizing, of course. I wound up doing an internship and I was closer to the broadcasting industry than I ever was. Like I could have just not gone and just done an internship for Christ's sake, but whatever. It was a roundabout way and it red pilled me. I got life experiences that I can then talk about because you realize really at that point, okay, this is why journalism is what it is. It really starts at the very beginning, from a sapling, that's really what's going on there. So yeah, that was wise.
Push you out, or did you graduate, or did it push you out?
I changed major. I wound up graduating in something else entirely. So yeah, I wound up shifting major, and it was just not for me. Journalism, the whole journalism thing was just not for me. I learned what I wanted to learn, and the applicable experience was really cool. But at that point, I just kind of realized, nah. I'm honestly. That was the point where I started to realize if you want to do something, you really shouldn't ask permission. You shouldn't go through official channels. You should just kind of do it and ask for forgiveness later.
When did you know you wanted to go into talk radio or broadcasting? Was it listening to Michael Savage or was it before that?
I always used to do the old thing where, you're a kid and you'd have the radio on and you could record the radio while it's playing or whatever. And you'd have the microphone on the tape deck and you could actually talk in between the breaks. I used to do that. I used to make my own radio show and do I've probably still got some of the tapes laying around, but I used to do that kind of thing. You'd do the talk segment and then you'd say, well, and now here's one for all the ladies. You know what I mean? You'd do that whole thing. So I kind of had a little bit of radio in my blood, from the very, very, very earliest days, from my nascence.
Okay, so now let's getting into the YouTube, and then we're going to get into some substance. So you start off in broadcasting school. You find out what it is. Incidentally, I had similar experiences in philosophy, but it was much harder to be right or left in philosophy until I took a class which was feminist philosophy.
I was going to say you and I had different philosophy professors then. Jesus Christ.
You have logic, and then you have Plato, and you have Heidegger. But then I took some political stuff, Dworkin, Andrea Dworkin stuff, and saw it. I took feminist philosophy, and I remember one of the amazing things was I wrote Ms. Professor on my essay, and it was crossed off and said Doctor whatever. And then I got a first taste of what it's like to have to. I'm saying this without judgment, but regurgitate the teacher party line to the teacher in order to get a decent grade, which I didn't do and which I did not get. And then you get into law and it's sort of a little different, but not much different. But
not a whole lot. Yeah.
No, that's it. You learn that. I learned a lot later, but better late than never. But so you go into broadcast school, you switch 2004, you start early on in the early ages of the internet. How do you get into YouTube? And what is YouTube the main thing that you're doing now, or are you doing other parallel not pastimes,
lots of stuff on the side? No, it's especially when you have my opinions and you make my kind of jokes, you don't tend to want to bank on just the one thing. You want to diversify. But I got into it kind of by accident. It was I was writing a series. Oh God, I'm carbon dating myself again. I was writing a series of blogs on MySpace, a little ditty called MySpace. And it was just for the benefit of my friends and family. And it was, ranting about whatever was irritating me. I found driving was a frequent topic. But anyways, I kept writing out these blogs. And one day I was writing out a blog and I happened to have caught the 1986 celluloid classic, the modern work of art known as Cobra, the Stallone film, and which is why I wear aviators to this day, by the way. It was because of that video. So I'm watching this movie and I'm like, this is amazing. I've witnessed the Ark of the Covenant here. This is a work of art. And I started writing out this blog, this hyperbolic, basically review of this, only it was comedic in nature. And I put that together and I realized as I'm doing it, man, this would be funnier. And I could record this in audio form and just hand it off to someone because I didn't know how to video edit. Then this would probably be a funny video. And because I was thinking at that time, put it up on MySpace for my friends. And I happened to have a friend who I worked with, a coworker at a video game store at that time. And he was editing together these cool DVDs to advertise video games to customers. Because at this particular, this is GameStop. And GameStop has this thing where they have this closed circuit television and they have this stupid video that plays. It's like 15 minutes long and it plays on a loop. And I'm pretty sure it technically violates the Geneva Convention. It's a form of torture. It's ridiculous. It's terrible. The games they advertise are god awful. Nobody could possibly want to buy a video game from watching these things. So what Terengel, who became my partner in crime on my channel, what he did is he would take video game trailers just from all over the internet. He would edit them together and just take the good stuff. And we would actually have content playing on, and pre-orders and everything. People really bought a lot more video games that way. So I knew that he could video edit. So I approached him and we did it. And before we put it up, we were like, well, let's just put it everywhere. We put it on Game Trailers, which was around at that time. And we put it on MySpace and we put it on YouTube. And he was thinking, what are you going to call your channel? It was called Razorfist at the time because that was the name I was doing video game tournaments, fighting game tournaments and stuff with. That's where the name comes from, by the way. And I was like, well, I'm not going to call it that. So whatever. We had no premonition it was going to be a series. He just says, oh, whatever, Rageaholic, because you get mad sometimes. Okay, cool. So literally he just came that quickly. He came up with it and that was it. It became the name of the series. But we started out reviewing Dick Cheese 80s action movies. So that's essentially.
Yeah, and so were you always a fan of that genre, or did you become a fan of that genre?
Oh, man. When I worked at this comic store, we used to have movie night I think it was Friday or Wednesday. Forget when it was. And it was just, God, it was a procession it was Rock and Roll Nightmare with John Michael Thor and Cobra and that Goldberg movie where he's Santa Claus. What is that called? Santa's Sleigh. And all it was just terrible, terrible. We watched Invasion USA with Chuck Norris. And this became like the breeding ground for what now is known as Rageaholic cinema. I just do 80s terrible but amazing movies and review them in hyperbolic fashion. Everybody else is trying to be the snarky guy. Oh, this is a terrible movie. Hey, everyone, look at my fedora and my nasally voice. And it's like, no, I worship these movies. You don't understand. This is what cinema should be. John Matrix is the patron saint of the Rageaholic. So I was like, yeah, that's what I do on Rageaholic Cinema. And so I've gone through basically the Walmart 5 for $1 bin. It's basically source of my power.
I'm going to bring this one up. I'm going to read this out loud because it's a good one. Don Consuelo says, the prophetic precision of Barnes and Razor cannot be overstated. Barnes assessed both ACB as a snake and Q for the psyop is equally matched by Razor's analysis of Sheriff Joe and Cinema 18, election foretelling General Flynn, and 2020, and Viva's a nice guy. Thank you very much. If you can't be prophetic, be nice. Now,
when you're talking about films that had cojones,
yeah.
When did you begin to witness castrated films like we see today?
I think it started, and this is going to be unpopular because I actually even like some of these movies, but there was this trend where I feel like first you trained a bodybuilder how to be an actor. Then they taught an actor how to be an action star, right? Like that kind of happened in the 90s. And then by the late 90s, you taught a chick how to be a man. Like there was this whole trend where it would be like the 90-pound woman and she'd be like kicking full-grown linebacker-looking dudes' asses. there was all these hallway fights. The Matrix ruined everything. I do think Matrix is kind of the demarcation point, right, between good action movies and bad action movies, honestly. And I don't even dislike The Matrix that much, but it's like, I feel like that was it. Once you could just be this waif in a trench coat and you could kick anyone's ass, to me, that kind of lost the appeal. I wanted to see Arnold as John Matrix with the Browning submachine gun, just good God, kill count, like seriously wasting all of South America. Like that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see Charles Bronson, the entire city of New York. You know what I mean? This is what you want to see in a good action movie. So.
It's an amazing thing. Matrix to me is the point also at which movies stopped having unforgiving violence and they had to go to forgiving violence. And then you had The Matrix, which spawned Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, all that genre where it stopped being about remorseless, Die Hard-esque, Total Recall-esque type violence, and it became the CGI sort of flying through the sky and just shows how fancy the action can get. And I tend to agree. I mean, that was the point at which it went into the artistic form of violence and not the merciless commando raw deal type things. But listening to the movies that you review, I think I'm like a newbie in that, okay, I've seen Raw Deal, Commando, Rambo. They were great. Die Hard, Total Recall. But I don't even know some of the movies that you're referencing. And watching the reviews makes me want to go back and watch them. What is your personal favorite of all time?
I mean, we'd have to shelve Cobra because it's like my North Star, but probably Death Wish, and it'd probably be Death Wish 2. A lot of people don't like Death Wish 2. I think it's better than the original. It's amazing. It's a really well-made movie too. It's a surprisingly there's a lot more to it underneath the surface, and I'm not even being facetious. But it's got the best one-liners. I mean, do you believe in Jesus? Yes, I do. Where you gonna meet him? I mean, come on, Jesus.
I mean, that whole genre, the Dirty Harry genre, the Death Wish genre, all of those sort of, I mean, they were sort of a crossover almost from drive-in theater and old school action that they just brought together, and they brought some of the best elements of both, intertwined them. And now, you can get those like direct to DVD, direct to streaming. What was interesting for a while was when the Worldwide Wrestling was doing its films. They were doing films that were like nonstop action, top to bottom, left to right. That it wasn't as good as some of those films, but it brought back some of the true pure action components of those films.
Oh yeah, the Stone. I've said this consistently. The most underrated action star today, and I wish he did more movies and less podcasts and bad shows on the Country Music Channel, is Stone Cold Steve Austin. He is so much better than The Rock in terms of his action movies. He really is, because he's the old throwback 80s guy. He's got the one-liners, and he's got the, oh my God, like, sounds like you had a hard life. Yes, I did. Good thing it's over. Like, God, come on. People need to watch this man's movies. It's so good. Make more movies, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Jesus. Condemned is great. Condemned is fantastic.
Now, and Razorfist, we've been talking with Nerdrotic, Doomcock on our channel and on his. When did you notice, setting aside the violence and the action not being what it was, when did you notice the hyper politicization of the genre of movies in general?
Notice it? I mean, I knew a little bit about the backstory. I've done a whole video on the history of communist infiltration in Hollywood, and really like the interesting takeaway from that is not so much that they inserted propaganda into movies, which kind of distinguishes it from today. There were actual communists in Hollywood being funded by the USSR to the tune of, God, up until 1989, it was like $4 to $6 million annually just for that one branch of the Communist Party USA. But the interesting thing about the movies from the 30s and 40s is that they didn't really insert that much propaganda. Really, what they accomplished is they got a hold of the unions. And so they got a hold of the Readers Union. And the readers were the guys who would look over the script. They were kind of like a secretary for the directors in the studio system. And so they would just put the kibosh on stuff that they thought was unflattering to communist Russia. So it's interesting in that modern cinema is almost more ideological than when communists were roving Hollywood. It's really interesting. I think I noticed maybe, like in terms of a movie, I remember watching the prequels, which I'm a defender of, the Star Wars prequels, and I remember thinking that the whole Senate stuff with George Lucas, I know people point out, I mean, it's gotten much worse in Star Wars since then, but I thought that was kind of an awkward Iraq war analog that he was going for, and it wasn't exactly working. And like, little things here and there, but I feel like in the last 4 or 5 years, like Ghostbusters 2016 was a big shot across the bow. The Last Jedi, my God. And I thought I detected some in like Star Trek 09 a little bit, just here and there. It felt like a peppering until about 2016, 2017. And then it was just, my God, they flopped their great big ideology cock on the screen. It was ridiculous.
The funny thing is, I think I missed the transition because I haven't seen a feature-length non-cartoon movie since 2009. And that's the age at which we started having kids. So yeah. I missed the transition, but now I've caught up quickly. And I'm just going to read this one out loud because someone says, in a Bronson voice, the Canadian Rebel. There's another one. In a Bronson voice, I don't even know what Bronson's voice is. You brought too many.
Yes. Spaghetti. That's a spaghetti Western technically, but any Bronson movie is gold. Even the bad ones, maybe especially the bad ones.
Yeah, I mean, there's really very few, like truly bad ones. I mean, but certain kinds of actors, certain kinds of characters, certain kinds of personas can pull off even a poor film where you enjoy watching it just because of them. Yeah. But the other thing is that it seemed to me part of this sort of cultural woke revolution taking over Hollywood. One of the first signs was really Gamergate. And everything related to it, the attempts to infect the gaming community, justify corruption in journalism, excuse it and exculpate it, and re-narrate the story as being somehow about feminism when it was just about corruption in journalism. What level were you involved in watching the whole Gamergate nonsense?
It was interesting. It was kind of a Plymouth Rock landed on me situation. I had already been doing a series called The Downfall of Gaming Journalism. I started doing that in 2012, 2013. It was a while before Gamergate. It was a year or two before Gamergate happened. And when Gamergate happened, everyone started discovering those videos again. And this is how I found out about the whole Gamergate thing. It was like, oh my God, you were talking about this like 2-3 years ago? What is this crap? Who is this guy? So what I was doing was I was going website by website, publication by publication. I'd talk about Game Informer because when I had the experience of knowing a little bit about journalism and how it's theoretically supposed to function, and also knowing a lot about the video game industry, having some connections in the video game industry, and having worked at a video game store, where we had to shill a terrible magazine, right? So it was interesting seeing, like, how is this the only industry where the only journalistic endeavor where the people that you're supposed to be objectively covering are 100% of your advertising? Like, you're supposed to put your journalist hat on, but your article is bracketed by, giant advertisements for the game. The game that you're objectively reviewing. I kind of knew something was up at that point. And video game journalism is just that way. You don't take it too seriously. And that's what's so hilarious about Gamergate. I think that's why Gamergate got so intense, is I don't think the people pointing out Gamergate and the corruption of video game journalism were taking it that seriously. This is why Stephen Colbert didn't get it when he was like, he was mocking people taking video game journalism seriously. It's like, dude, you're not getting it. The people who pointed it out didn't take it that seriously. Who takes video game journalism that seriously? The point was, when we pointed it out, the left lost their minds. They lost their mind. It was absolutely like throwing down the gauntlet for them. They thought their cultural influence was eroding. And I think that's really what it was. Like, on some deep psychological level, it was an actual point where they tried to push propaganda, and for once they got pushback. Like our parents and grandparents couldn't even do that in the 70s, in the 60s, you know, when there are literal avowed Marxists marching in the streets. There wasn't even all that much cultural pushback. But here's some nonsense about video games, and that's where they get the pushback. There are still some people who are like mentally on the left. They're like mentally scarred. They've got like PTSD from Gamergate because it's like the one time finally people just whirled around and said, no, not so much. No, we're not going to buy that video game. And we're going to make fun of you incessantly for it.
Exactly. I mean, go ahead.
I'm going to read this one because Razorfist is one of the most genius political analysts of our time. Nate Silver is a hack. Campaigns should hire Razor instead. God freaking speed. Then I'm going to get into the question. Robert, you go.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Gamergate, I ended up doing a deep dive in it when I was trying to study the presidential election because there was this whole community of people I hadn't seen politically active before. In the the Reddit memers, people on YouTube creating all these great memes. It was this whole method of new means of communication, and they were all overwhelmingly they came from Gamergate. That a lot of them were kids that were not even politically active or that politically curious about the world. Saw politics as an old man's boomer game, and suddenly they were engaged. Suddenly they were involved. They saw Trump through an entirely different filter than almost everybody else because of their experience in part through Gamergate. And it was sort of this turning tide at the beginning of when they were so used to walking through the institutions and winning at every single stage. They suddenly ran up against a bunch of 16-year-old autists who were like, no, you're not screwing with my game. You're not lying to me about what you're doing. We're going to mock you. We're going to satirize you. We're going to ridicule you. And they were shocked. The system, the people so accustomed to doing whatever they wanted culturally, whether it was a human resources office at your local corporation or the local government bureaucracy or the local news station, the local newspaper, the local public school, they had never lost. And powerful institutions, big universities, big corporations, big Hollywood, big media. And it turns out it's a bunch of kids who were able to successfully push back against them. Was that inspiring at all for you?
And it was microcosmic is really, I think, what the issue is and why they still name check Gamergate all these years later. I don't hate Anita Sarkeesian. She's my favorite Portlandia character. You know what I mean? Like, it's whatever. But it's the fact that some of the behavior that she just through defending her was exposed. The Game Journo Pros thing, where you had names from every video game website in a private forum literally saying, oh, push this narrative. Oh, don't push this narrative. And people actually got in there and were like, what? But it's microcosmic. They do this at major newspapers. Or there was that story. You remember this? Either of you remember this story? It was like in 2003 or 4, I want to say, where a memo was unearthed at Fox News, an internal memo about, the round and about of it was slant that news story to the right? And they tried to make a big story out of it. And Bill O'Reilly had the best comeback in the world for this. When they asked him about it, he was like, is it bad that we had this memo going around the office at a network that is clearly trying to present news from a certain perspective? Or is it worse that the other newsrooms are all so ideologically in step, they don't need to send those memos out?
First of all, we've learned that not only do they send those memos out, they have group meetings to align ideologically as to the spin that they're going to give. The whole irony in Kierkegaard, life can only be lived forwards but understood backwards. In retrospect, in hindsight, the only reason they made the stink out of it is it's confession through projection. They want to demonize their adversaries for doing exactly what they're doing themselves as a form of distraction. I think it's one of Alinsky's rules of radicals as well. But yeah, it is the Gamergate thing is interesting because it basically illustrates what happens from a Canadian perspective when the government subsidizes the media. When you have that fundamental conflict of interest that the allegedly free press is beholden to that on which they're reporting, whether it's Gamergate or whether it's politics or whether it's government, you have the same fundamental problem. It's skewed, it's tainted, and once that becomes known, that's what's the expression? That is toothpaste you can't put back in the squeezy thing. But I remember Gamergate only tangentially. I was not aware back then. I remember Sargon of Akkad was heavy into it, was being called all sorts of names, misogynist, because he was criticizing a woman because loving every minute of it. No, it's an amazing thing. It's like it was the beginning of my understanding that when people don't like your position, they just go after the identity politics aspect of it and ignore the position. And I think everybody now is so aware of it that it's brought us to where we are with respect to the respect we have for the media.
Yeah, and Marvel movies and everything now, the Gamergate narrative kind of diffused into I think it red pilled a lot of people, really. It was, at the end of the day, that's what it was. It was a catalytic event. It was a red pill moment for a lot of people. Hey, wait a minute, if they're doing this in video games, and this is also probably why video games wound up being the front line, because mainstream media waited way too long to acknowledge that video games were the future of entertainment. I mean, they waited way too long. They honestly, for a long time, Hollywood honestly thought, this video games thing will go away. They really did think that. And so we don't need to worry about, censoring them. We don't need to worry about pushing our messages in them. We've got Hollywood. That's where we'll put our messages, or just suppress messages that we disagree with and so forth. They learned in a hurry that wasn't the case. Yeah, it's not coincidental that Gamergate happened around 2014 when new systems came out, and those systems were breaking all-time records. It was, video games had a renewed market penetration. So it was kind of that, honestly, that informed it as much as anything else. I think Bill Whittle did a video about this, where they're pushing into video games because the other media that they've been pushing are dying a slow death. So they have to kind of and that's how you wind up with the Game Awards, where Jeff Keighley is, standing on stage looking sleepy as usual, while a bunch of developers are accepting award and thanking Karl Marx for it. That's how you wind up with that.
What's amazing is how much your gamer community and constituency was really a sort of a native resistance to this sort of cultural revolution taking place, had developed the skill set and the acumen in the community to help fight back at a sophisticated and intelligent level. And I remember when my son started getting into games, I had sort of an old school idea about games that, it's a distraction. It's not good for your brain. But I saw that it gave him a sense of self, a sense of pride, a sense of community, a sense of identity, a sense of enjoyment, all of it tied in. So I started to research it more, and then realized that, in fact, actual studies of games, contrary to, Al Gore and the rest, before he was pitching climate apocalypse, he was pitching video game apocalypse. But in between, smiling with Tipper and asking the massage to move her hand up a little more. That was Al. But is that, in fact, it actually improves a wide range of mental skills. It's actually a very useful for improving not just certain aspects of communication, but certain quickness of thinking. Actually, it improves it dramatically. I was fascinated by the studies and surveys. How long have you been a gamer? My grandfather, okay, I actually know, strangely enough. My grandfather, I didn't ask for a video game console. It was one Christmas. I used to go over to my grandfather's house. He was like this hard drinking, chain smoking, NASCAR. He sounded like Johnny Cash. He was that kind of guy. He didn't know the first thing about video games. He was just the guy who sits in the back of the room and, treats with everyone while chain smoking like a chimney. And I show up on Christmas, and, I had asthma as a little kid, so I'm trying not to cover my mouth and whatever. And he hands me, he's like, here you go. And it's a little thing with $50 in it, which is a lot of money in whatever it was, $1988 or whatever it was. And then he's like, oh, and that's yours. And it was a big box, and it was a Nintendo, and it came with the first Ninja Turtles game for Nintendo Entertainment System, the original Nintendo Entertainment System.
Worst game ever. I can't play that game.
I thought there was something wrong with me when I was playing. I was like, am I just stupid? Can I not beat this? Am I dumb? Is there something wrong? I can't play that game. I can win. I can finish Double Dragon. I can finish Super Mario. I can't play the Ninja Turtles game. And I think my thumbs don't work when it comes to that game. But now I'll tell you, Razorfist, you're 40. You're not 35, man. That's my guess right now. No, I'm not. But no, absolutely. He got me here's the thing, I got it like at the tail end of the I think Super Nintendo was about to come out or had come out or something by the time I got a Nintendo. So I was behind the curve. I was always like a generation behind all throughout the 90s as a little kid. So, but I grew up in the 90s, but I got a Nintendo Entertainment System, and my first game was, Ninja Turtles. And then I wound up getting the later Ninja Turtles games that are all awesome. Like Ninja Turtles 3 and all that stuff was great. So that kind of inculcated me into video games. And then a little place out here that I like to call Peter Piper Pizza, which is honestly a glorified arcade. Like, that's all it is. It's an arcade with a side of pizza. They had the Ninja Turtles arcade cabinet. They had Virtua Fighter when it came out and Mortal Kombat. And I was obsessed with the arcades. And I still love arcades to this day. We're out here in Phoenix. We're privileged. We got an awesome 3-story arcade at a place called Castles and Coasters right down the road. So really, really cool. And I've been obsessed with that ever since. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Well, I mean, arcades used to be kind of an iconic institution. I mean, it used to be, whether when they went into malls, even before then, outside of that. I mean, it was a place where you associated, a place where it was a community, a place where you gathered, a place where you were entertained, a place where, and it's sad how much they've faded out. Part of what I liked about Stranger Things was the throwback to the 80s and the Orange Julius stores, but part of it was the arcades, and it's sort of unfortunate to see it, though. In my son's experience, it's now virtual. I mean, because you can play games with anybody anywhere in the world. I mean, I used to listen to him when he was 12, 13, 14 years old, and he would pretend to be different voices because somehow somebody thought he was a girl. They'd give him free stuff or something on that thing. I mean, just crazy stuff all over the place. But he was creating his own imaginative world and universe while establishing connection and community. Did it serve any of that purpose for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. That was a lot of my socialization process, learning about quarter games. And I'll never forget going to Pistol Pete's Pizza one day. That was kind of a Peter Piper Pizza knockoff out here. Really good place, though. And walking around, and I guess they had some event or something, and they left the video games on free play. And I was like, yes, you know what I mean? It's like, it's like trying not to look directly upon the Ark of the Covenant. And getting to play Street Fighter 2 and doing the putting your quarter down, waiting to play. And so that's socialization is what that is. It's sad that kids don't get that, but you still have a variant of that in online gaming. So it is what it is. The thing that I'm worried the most about now is online gaming. A lot of times it used to be people would text a lot on online gaming, in the late 90s when that first kind of started with online gaming. Then once we got video chat with the advent of the Xbox and the PS2 and whatnot, people use that a lot, the voice chat. Nowadays, everybody just mutes their microphone and sits there and doesn't really talk. They just kind of do their thing in a lot of cases. And I feel like that's kind of robbing kids of a lot of socialization a little bit. You got to have that. I was cool with all of this. I just wanted, I think it would be better for kids if they were able to relate. As bad as it is to have a 12-year-old, saying pussy 50 times, in your ear or something. Like, as bad as that is, but still, I feel like it is valuable in a social context.
Okay, Razorfist, I got to ask you the question. People ask me all the time, but watching your videos, okay, do you script your videos before you do them? How much? I mean, I didn't notice much editing, which causes me to ask the question, how do you have this in your head so quickly? How does it come out so quickly? Where's your data or your bank of these expressions that you use? And what do you do to prepare, script, shoot a video?
I work from a bullet point outline. As part of that's definitely part of the broadcasting school. I did a lot of public speaking classes and communications classes as a result of that. And honestly, that was the main thing. In fact, when I first was going to transfer to broadcasting school, I remember briefly, hold your laughter, ladies and gentlemen, I was briefly a communications major for a minute. So I had to take a lot of communications and classes. Don't worry, I changed major very, very quickly. Don't worry about it. Keep away from the railing. But consequently, I learned how to work off of note cards, kind of have verbal triggers. And so I do not have a script, but I'll usually have a bullet point outline sitting off to the side that I can refer back to. A lot of times I don't even look at it, but it's like a comfort thing. And sometimes it gets kind of detailed. So it's maybe something between a script and a bullet point outline sometimes, where usually what I'll write out is like a joke or a something. Because I find if you get if you wander too far afield, essentially, of the point, it's good to kind of hammer back in with a joke, you know? So I'll have a few like one-liners or something written off to the side. Sometimes I'll use them, sometimes I won't. Sometimes I'll just turn on the camera and I'll be so pissed off it won't matter. You know what I mean? So it really doesn't matter, but that's generally how I like to work. And scripting doesn't work for me. I tried. Number one, my eyeballs don't work. My vision is terrible. I have to blow the text up on my bullet points, you know, to Oprah sizes just to be able to read it because like my vision's so blurred. So I couldn't fit a script on the screen is my point. I tried it once with like we rigged up, not a teleprompter. We rigged up like, I forget what we did. My video editor rigged up something where the text would scroll. I've never had more anxiety in my life, like trying to read the scrolling text in my life. It just doesn't work for me. Also, I have this thing. Am I the only person who has this? Is this some kind of disorder where when I read aloud to people, I have to yawn? Does anybody? It's like a psychological, it triggers a yawn every time. I don't know why.
Mine is the saliva in my mouth. I have a neuroses about hearing when people are talking, and I have to continually make sure that my mouth is clean and no one hears puckers in my mouth. But Razorfist, I'm going to ask you the question people ask me. Have you ever been diagnosed with ADHD or anything along those lines, which might otherwise explain what is quite clearly a rapid-firing brain?
No, definitely not. Nope, just good old-fashioned coffee and being an asshole. That's all.
Yeah, well, you know, that's interesting. I mean, I think actually reading is almost always a bad idea, unless you're Joe Biden and you have no other choice.
Right.
But so for everyone else, it's much better to learn. You know, you might even write out a speech. I've told people, you know, I start off writing a bunch of comments. Then sometimes I may produce a whole speech out of it, then reduce it to a bunch of comments, then have about 5 or 6 bullet points by the end.
Yeah, and no cards are great too for that.
Yep.
But
exactly. I mean, but the teleprompter stuff, the other guy I've seen that's really good at this, that has no teleprompter at all, is of course Alexander Emmerich Jones. And he can just, I've been in his studios. There is no teleprompter. If he wanted to use one, it ain't there. Which, you know, to go 3 hours a day, I don't know how the man does it, but it just requires a certain kind of innate connection to the material, understanding of the material, and a certain natural verbosity. And it helps if you have a memory palace that you can utilize as well, or some visual association or affiliation.
Well, I do talk through it. That's another. If it sounds rehearsed, it is. What I'll do usually when I'm thinking of a rant, when I can feel a rant percolating, I'll be walking around doing chores, or I'll be drawing, or something that doesn't require much brain power. And as I'm doing it, I'll be talking aloud to myself. I talk aloud to myself like a madman. I'll be
that's what's great about like cell phones and whatnot. I've done that my whole life. But once like cell phones and, you know, the people can't tell whether you're talking, it's now normal. I just speak out loud. So it might look like I'm talking to myself, but
I love walking outside on the street and playing the game show sensation that's sweeping the nation, Schizophrenia or Smartphone, every single time. Every single time, folks.
It's a very difficult thing, especially with the cable-less earbuds that you don't know who the person is talking to. But it's such an interesting thing. You get into the rant, you're mentally preparing regardless of what you're doing, and then it just comes out relatively fluidly as you do this. So there's right?
Well, as I'm going, I'll talk through little. It turns into a bit, honestly. It's kind of like stand-up comedy is the way I approach it, which I've done a little bit of. And I'll be talking through it. I'll realize, okay, that's kind of a funny bit. And I'll write out, that's kind of how the bullet point outline comes together. I'll think, okay, I'll write out a sentence that like triggers that. Cause I'll remember what I said. So I just kind of write that out. And basically I'm just writing a list of triggers so that I don't have to remember absolutely everything. And so that I can keep myself on track. Cause I tend to ramble, but like scripting has drawbacks for a lot of people. It works for a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with it if it works for you. Dennis Miller is probably my #1 comedic inspiration on planet Earth. And on his show on Dennis Miller Live, he was a teleprompter read in full. You know what I mean? Doesn't matter. Some people, it really, really works for them. For me, not so much. Plus, Dennis Miller, he could do stand-up without looking at a teleprompter, so obviously he didn't need it. It's just he's doing a new rant every single week on his show. He's got to have some way to have recall of it. But like other people who may or may not be duly elected presidents of the United States, Gabe, what kind of refined fucking moon rocks do you figure they're slamming into that haggard old exoskeleton to reanimate it every morning? Like, seriously.
There was I was going to tweet it out just because it was such a perfect image on Fox News. The headline was basically something along the lines of "World is on fire," and it had Joe Biden with this look on his face, which I know it's editorialized. They picked the most unflattering image they could possibly find to fit the story, but my goodness, was it the most effective unflattering image ever. It was Joe Biden like with that toothless sort of gaping mouth open looking to the sky while the world literally burns behind him, which is a pretty good segue into this question, Razorfist.
Yeah.
What has been the most triggering, the most rage-inducing event, political or cinematic or gaming, in your YouTube career?
Oh man, that's a good one. I mean, here's the thing. I feel like the rage almost puts some emotional distance between me. Like having the sort of videos and the rants to do sort of puts an emotional distance on it. So I almost don't take it very personally. It's a character in a way that I'm playing, right? It's me turned up to 11 kind of is what it is. So I don't really worry about it too much, but oh man, things that particularly pissed me off. My favorite video game series of all time, in like a more banal video game context, entertainment context, my favorite video game series of all time is Thief. Awesome series where you sneak around. It's a medieval fantasy thing, but it's a stealth game. And there was a sequel that came out that we don't talk about. It came out in 2014. It was terrible. You could see that it was terrible from like 9 blocks away. You could just tell. You know when you just know there's a turn around the corner? I got that feeling when Cyberpunk 2077 was about to come out. I just knew it. I knew it. It was in the back of my mind. But that, oh my God. I'm like still a little emotionally traumatized from that. But in like a societal context, God, the way... I've done a series of videos on Michael Jackson, the Michael Jackson allegations. I, in a deeply emotional context, feel bad for his family having to deal with the fact that he was exonerated on 14 counts, including 4 lesser misdemeanors, in record time, a month early before the trial was scheduled to end, and still is called a pedophile to this day because people want to get paid. That makes me mad, really mad. And I've done 3 videos totaling like what? An hour and a half in duration or something. I mean, I went off.
It was that was your most, as far as I can tell, that was your most popular video on YouTube, was the Michael Jackson defense.
Maybe. I don't know. It has certainly made the rounds. Yeah, I don't really check view counts, really. But I know it was popular. Yeah.
So it was, go on. Now, someone had just asked about that. Here, it's Shaker Silver still in there. Ask him about Michael Jackson's legal cases. All right, here's the first question because it intrigued me. You mentioned it. Why does it irritate you in particular?
Because the allegations were not an accident. Evan Chandler, who generated the allegations, the accuser in 1993 was not the child, it was the father. And he truly did cultivate these accusations because he knew they were the thing that would affect Michael Jackson so deeply and emotionally that he would feel more pressured than usual to settle. Like it was targeted because he could never have conceived of hurting a child. Like it literally made him want to vomit. And it was like they literally directed. And the worst part about it is now you have devoted entire communities to just upholding this illusory belief that he fucked kids in complete contravention of the facts, of the actual transcripts in the court cases. People cling to long disproven delusions. Like they'll compare him to O.J. Simpson when his case is the literal exact opposite of O.J. Simpson. Like O.J. Simpson was exonerated in a criminal court, and then in civil court he lost, right? Total opposite, where in 1993 the father leveled a civil case first because he wanted to get paid, and he wasn't getting paid by Michael Jackson, so he leveled a civil suit. And then as part of that civil suit, he sent his kid to the psychiatrist to get examined to sort of strengthen his case, not knowing that the psychiatrist is legally compelled by California law to report that. And then suddenly he's dealing with a criminal case that he didn't want. So consequently, there was a civil case scheduled before a criminal case, which is allowed to happen for some reason in California because of some silly provision about underage victims get an especially expedient trial, right? They're guaranteed that or something like that. So it's like the opposite. He was pressured into settling the civil case because he didn't want to give away his criminal defense, because he could have wound up in prison if he had not settled that case. So it's a shame. It was actually not bad legal advice, but they underestimated the fact that there was a new paradigm being created here. This had never happened before. This was not Fatty Arbuckle. This was a totally new deal. And I think everyone involved, his legal team, everybody was massively underrated what was going to happen. So yeah, like that's a big reason why is people still hold the kind of cherished delusions about it. And you can't tell some people. You just can't. It's like, well, yeah, but I saw a documentary on HBO. It's like,
no,
well,
it's not that. It's that people look at Michael Jackson and say he was such a bizarre human in any event that they'll allow themselves to believe the worst because the obvious was true, that he was quite peculiar, and quite bizarre in a number of ways so that people can justify believing it. I know Robert's going to agree with you on Michael Jackson. He will disagree with you on O.J. Simpson. But I know that Robert has.
I don't know enough. I should say I don't know enough about O.J. Simpson, the O.J. Simpson case, to opine on that. I'm making the comparison. It's the opposite. It's this number one. The civil case was rushed forward so that basically to undermine his criminal defense. Whereas the O.J. Simpson case, you actually, like it's supposed to, you got the civil case after the criminal case.
Right.
So.
I mean, the thing with Michael, losing Neverland is just a big fat lie. Oprah's been propagating it for a while now. It was actually my first conversation with Wesley Snipes was about Michael Jackson's case, because it happened to be, for a range of reasons, I'd represented victims of abuse very early on in my legal career, and consequently had to study in detail anything about it, because you discover pretty quickly you have false accusations mixed in with true accusations, and judges are experienced with not knowing who is telling the truth. And the social workers in the industry believe everybody, which is garbage. And it led to people who are really victims not getting justice, and leading to people who weren't victims getting a corruption of justice. And so in that process, studied a lot of it, studied Michael Jackson's case in detail even before I happened to run into Wes about it. And, the reality is Michael Jackson always wanted to be a kid. He wanted to rediscover his childhood that he felt was stolen from him, because it was, by his father. And so everything he was building, sexual abuse is about power. It's not somebody who wants to be a kid. It's somebody who wants power over a kid. Michael Jackson never showed any of the signs of wanting power over a kid. He wanted to be 11, 12, and 13 as much as he could. He wanted to recreate and rediscover and get back his childhood. That's why he built an amusement park. That's why he built a bedroom that was more like a 2-bedroom penthouse suite than it was a bedroom. That's why the bed was itself massive. He wanted constant
which is one
party.
of the things that they'll always throw at you is, but kids slept in his bedroom. It's like, his bedroom's a duplex. His family has 3 bathrooms.
Parents slept in there. All kinds of people slept in there. So the whole mythology, I knew some of the people that did security at Michael Jackson's place, not the ones who were trying to extort him, but the legit ones. And everybody, the thing is, there were hundreds of kids who associated with Michael Jackson over the years. Very few have ever accused him. That's part one. Part two, people like Corey Haim, who has no problem accusing people who are actually guilty of child abuse, said it was completely false about Michael Jackson. So, in fact, the only people who have ever accused him, not only are they a tiny percentage of the people that were around him, they're people who all had a monetary motivation to lie about him. Every single one. So I predicted that acquittal before it came down. In fact, that's what the trial was about to happen when I met Snipes. and I laid out why I thought Michael Jackson was totally innocent, and because thankfully Michael Jackson had jettisoned that nitwit lawyer he had before. I won't name him. People can look him up. He might have also represented Scott Peterson, but and hired one of the 3 living legends of lawyers that I have the greatest respect for in the world. Yeah. One is Alan Dershowitz. Another one is Jerry Spence. The third is Tom Mesereau. Yeah. Tom Mesereau is one of the greatest criminal defense lawyers in American history. And as soon as Michael Jackson hired him, given what I already believed about Jackson and knowing about all the corruption by that prosecutor and repeatedly targeting Jackson, using illicit methods to do so, illicit threats to do so, try to coerce perjured testimony repeatedly to try to attain a conviction, I felt confident that it would be straight not guilty verdicts. And for folks out there that still don't believe the verdict, that was a very conservative right-wing jury pool at the time. Yeah, those were old white. They would have been happy. They had no cultural connection to they were like the 9 good jurors I had in the Wesley Snipes case. They were conservative. They were law enforcement. There's zero chance they acquit him because of celebrity. There's zero chance they would have no relationship to him. They would see him as a weird guy. But they understood he was clearly the victim of fraudulent allegations and accusations. And one of the key witnesses in that case is the witness who flipped around and told a bogus story. It was one of the key witnesses in Losing Neverland, told all kinds of lies. If you dig into their stories, they were inherently contradictory. They would be contradicted by dates and times. People still forget that the original Michael Jackson indictment had the wrong dates. And because his idiot lawyer, might rhyme with Garagos, went out and told everybody the dates were wrong, the prosecutor went back and came up with new dates that the abuse happened, because it turned out the first dates were completely contradicted by clear evidence. So there was just lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. And it's one of the first cases of media malpractice. Every day, it was similar to the O.J. Simpson case. Every day the media would come out and spin a story that was not what happened in the jury room, or not what happened in the trial or in the courtroom, because Mesereau was tearing apart these people one after the other because their lies were so obvious, so apparent, so easy to prove. If you knew what you were doing.
One of them. There was one point where he's cross-examining the accuser, the boy. I blanking on the kid's name.
It was the cancer patient guy,
the cancer patient kid, and he's cross-examining him. And he's just sensing that the kid's on edge, like he's mad about something, like he's keyed up. And he kind of goes, "What are you so upset about?" He got an instinct. You're not really supposed to do this as a lawyer, as a defense lawyer. He just got a feeling, and he's like, "I'm going to push him on this." And he just goes, what are you upset about?" And he just goes, "He didn't have to stop talking to me." And it's like, that's an odd thing for a sexual abuse victim to say.
Well, here's the Razor. Some people could say, like, that's the emotional scar that it leaves when you've been sexually abused by someone, is when they detach from you. That's the extra insult to the physical abuse. Yeah. And the issue about this case, why it makes it such a hot one, is that in order to affirm or believe in Michael Jackson's guilt, you have to believe that a victim who was a child at the time is lying. And I got a different perspective on this when I listened to a Malcolm Gladwell podcast about memory. It's you don't have to believe that someone's lying in order to understand how malleable memory is over time. Malleable in the sense that it can be warped and, I say, falsified, but it can be distorted over time to the point where someone can remember something that didn't happen the way it did, didn't happen at all, or happened with someone else. And this is how people who are not into law and who are not into these types of evidentiary issues will say, it's a kid. Why would a kid lie? And why would an adult lie as to what happened as a kid? These memories are traumatic, etc. That's the issue that's at play here. But I mean, it's a good point that, under cross, one of the key witnesses says he didn't have to stop talking to me. And what was the consensus as to why he was angry about that?
Well, and not only that, but there was a lot of information. It was interesting. You'll hear a lot from people who are advocates of, Michael Jackson's guilt and all the unspoken victims and such. And they'll say things like, well, he slept in the bed with little kids. It's like, okay, that's odd. Why didn't the 2005 accuser ever say that he slept in the bed with Michael Jackson then? Because even the accuser, if you read the transcripts, said, no, Michael Jackson slept on the bed. And actually there was a guy there. Michael was really uncomfortable when the kid started asking to sleep at his place, because there had been a couple of occasions where the mom had been weird about getting money and stuff. She had been given like a platinum card. He was just getting vibes. He was a little naive, but he wasn't as naive as people think. He was a smart guy. And he just got a vibe. So he literally told his friend, he's like, okay, you can stay. I'm going to have this guy stay right here so that I have a third-party witness. And we're going to go sleep on the floor. And by floor, he meant like, this is a duplex. This is 2 stories, gang. He meant like second floor, right? Or first floor. So it's like, it doesn't say what they think that it says at the end of the day. If that was true, then why didn't the actual accuser say it? And the other interesting thing about it is that people will say, well, I don't know about the 2005 accuser. Maybe that was just about money. But those 1993 allegations, boy, those are really valid. And it's like, man, number one, you have to understand, because of a ludicrous statute in California, I mean, just laughably pro-prosecution, called 1108 evidence, I believe, where it's evidence of prior bad acts. Because of this, they essentially got to try both cases. Basically, they got to try the 1993 allegations at the same time as the 2005 allegations, and they did not help at all. At all. And it was abundantly clear that the smoking gun evidence that they kept talking about, the pictures of Michael Jackson's genitals and so forth, oh, they matched the description and so forth. It's like the kid couldn't even get whether according to a deposition from one of the sheriff's deputies who was actually there. I'm blanking on what the name of that deposition is, but regardless, according to that, he claimed that Michael Jackson was circumcised when he's not. And so, like, that's a pretty basic thing to get wrong and stuff. So they literally withheld that. Like, it was abundantly clear Tom Sneddon just wanted to keep it up. Like, he wanted to keep people suspecting that Michael Jackson was guilty. He had this photographic evidence, which he could have used. He waited until the very end of the trial, like literally days before they were going to close, and to propose, oh, let's enter these photos into evidence. Like, basically, please throw this evidence out, Judge, because I can't, if I use it, I'm a dead man. And of course, the judge was like, no, not this late in the trial. No, absolutely not. And of course, the people who think Michael Jackson was guilty use that as proof that his legal team was burying evidence. It's just silly. Tom Mesereau was like, no, bring it out. Go ahead, please.
Well, and people don't remember, he was acquitted of all the giving alcohol to kids, completely acquitted, complete lies, giving porn magazines to kids. Yeah. That was falsified. What they did is they took the magazine, gave it to a kid, have the kid hand it, then put it back in, and then kind of like the O.J. Simpson case, tested it afterwards and said, oh, look, the kid's fingerprints are on it. Only on it after they gave it to the kid to make sure fingerprints were on it. Yep. There was no evidence of that. There was a false story that there was child porn found. No, there wasn't. And by the way, that's an extremely rare event. You have multiple search warrants executed on Michael Jackson over the years. They found 0 child porn. There was they reached too. He had like picture books of the making of they tried to pretend art books in one of the biggest libraries in the world, which is Michael Jackson's library, that art books it were child porn. It was complete lies. Breitbart bought this nonsense a few years ago. They repeated this bogus story. Completely false. These are all completely false stories. Many of these false stories only happened after Michael Jackson was dead because he can't sue for defamation.
Yeah, Breitbart
forget. Jackson sued employees. Jackson sued a bunch of other people and won repeatedly for saying these lies.
Yep. And Breitbart, gosh, I wonder if it's a coincidence that Ben Shapiro has done multiple videos about Michael Jackson being guilty, and he happened to work at Breitbart at the time. I wonder.
And that's why I tell people, if you want to see bad advice, why don't cite Ben Shapiro for anything. One, his book is crap. Just read Will Chamberlain's Taking It Apart. It's not a serious intellectual book. Ben Shapiro would not hold up with serious intellectuals. Number 2, he gets things like this completely wrong. He gets the O.J. Simpson case completely wrong, but that I can forgive because a lot of people get it wrong. But this case, he gets completely wrong. He has no idea. He's like, there's strong evidence. If there was strong evidence, why has Michael Jackson never lost a single court case about this? This was an extortion scheme from day one, written by a journalist who lied about him, a journalist who was successfully sued for lying about him, so much so that he fled the country to avoid paying judgment. And everybody else since then has been copying and pasting the allegations in that original extortion scheme.
Hold on. Who's the journalist?
Victor Gutierrez.
Okay.
Victor Gutierrez. And calling him a journalist is, whoa, charitable in the extreme. You should open up a charity over there, Barnes. My goodness. Mother Teresa calling this guy a journalist. He wrote basically a pedophilic fantasy about Michael Jackson. He wrote a book that was really creepy stuff called I forget what the name of it was, but it was basically a pedophilic sex fantasy essentially about Michael Jackson and Jordan Chandler, the accuser from 1993. There was no apparent involvement of the Chandlers, by the way. It was just he totally went off and wrote this thing. It's total fiction. And it's abundantly clear that the new accusers, the guys from Leaving Neverland, copied and pasted a lot of the stuff from it, like just copied and pasted, really obvious. And that's a huge mistake because that was talked about in 1993, and the Michael Jackson defense team prepared a defense for that already. Victor Gutierrez was sued by Michael Jackson, didn't even show up for court, and lost a multi-million-dollar judgment. He's not even allowed in the U.S. anymore because if he shows up, he'll have to pay that money. And only by the hair of her chinny chin chin was that Herod and Diane Diamond spared the same fate. You know, she cowered behind, well, I'm just a journalist. I was just interviewing him. That's all. You know, I didn't come up with the allegations. Meanwhile, she's got like a giant wall of Michael Jackson allegations behind her in every video she does, like the woman is dedicated to the principle of destroying Michael Jackson, but somehow she skates on that. They were very charitable to her as well. But Cosby's another case that I'm going to have to do a video on that at some point, because however you feel about his accusations, he did not receive the beginnings of a fair trial at all.
No. Well, once he got the first mistrial, they were never going to let him have a second fair trial.
Yeah, no way.
Okay, Razorfist, a question I had for you. Is your channel fully monetized, fully demonetized, or does it depend on the video?
Seems to depend on the video.
Okay.
I can say I haven't depended on ad revenue in a very, very, very long time. You know what I mean?
I was only asking because I noticed ads on some videos and quality ads and none on others. And I was wondering if it was one of the cases where YouTube decides to demonetize the channel but still run ads. And I was going to talk to Robert about a potential, argument for unjust enrichment. Now I'm going to bring this one up because I don't know what it means. Tell these boys why the Puritan warrior is the model of a man to aspire to. I hope I didn't just get myself in trouble. Von Cobra.
He's talking about Solomon Kane. I was talking about Pulps earlier. Solomon Kane, the dour Puritan heathen slayer. I love him.
All right, now
didn't they make movies way back and then make another set of recent movies that are Solomon Kane based?
No old movies that I'm aware of, but they made a new one in 2009 that gets a lot of stick. I love it. Personally. It starred James Purefoy, a guy from Rome and Altered Carbon. Yes. He was great.
Yes.
He was great.
I think I saw it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of Van Helsing-ish, honestly, but that owes to the fact that Van Helsing is kind of a ripoff of Solomon Kane. It's just their movie came out first. It just is what it is, but it's a very, very cool movie, and I liked him as Solomon Kane. But it's awesome, man. If you guys are talking about, all you embrace tradition folks, if you're not reading about dour heathen slayer guy who roves the country, I mean, God, Robert E. Howard, that was his best character, in my opinion. I know people love Conan, but Solomon Kane is something else.
Razorfist, let's get into another subject that I know you feel passionate about. I watched the video. It's now a 5-year-old video, but it's more not prescient, but rather more relevant today, perhaps, than it was in 2016. But I love the story, or I love the video because it reveals a funny story about your upbringing, the border wall, the border crisis, the surge on the border, etc. Now you put out a video in 2016 talking about why the wall was necessary, and it got into your childhood growing up. I think it was in Phoenix, and your neighbor who was eccentric. But tell us the story, and then let's get into another. I think this might be on your top 5 of rage rants. But the wall, why it was necessary then, why it's probably more necessary now. But your neighbor, tell us, for those who don't know, the story.
Yeah, really, I approached that video. It's called "Why We Need the Wall." What I did in that video was, they didn't too many people on the right make the point of, look how much the border issue is dragging our country down. And I think that's the wrong approach. You have to take the left's argument and turn it on them and have them from both sides. And they like to make the compassion argument. And meanwhile, they've subjected entire generations of Mexican citizens to misery, death, and cartel violence because of their permissive border policies. Entire generations of people are dead today because of Obama's border policies and Ted Kennedy's immigration bill, and all this stuff is, you know, at the end of the day has hurt Mexico as much as it's hurt us. So I took an approach where, okay, we start out in the US and then we go to Mexico and show how bad it is there because of the open borders, because that's the part that doesn't get talked about. And I wish Trump had talked about it a little bit. I think that's one of the reasons the Mexican regime, or parts of the Mexican regime, were a little more sympathetic to his message than some other countries were. But I grew up in South Phoenix, kind of a retirement-ish community, lots of old people, you know, very, I was on the border a little bit with South Phoenix, but it was, you know, in that area, and it was a nice area. It was mostly old people, nice, well-kept houses. And then, of course, as happens, either the old people move on to retirement communities or they die off one by one, and the children inherit the houses, and they rarely live in them. They usually flip them. And at that time, there was a freeway. I forget what it is, the 60 or something. It was being worked on at the time. That was basically in a roundabout way going to connect us circuitously to Tucson, right? That's how this highway was going to had an artery right near us once it was completed. And once it was completed, it was basically going to be a direct pipeline to Tucson. And Tucson, for those who don't know, is right next to the border. You know, it's minutes away from the U.S.-Mexico border. So basically, over time, illegal immigration began to take a bigger toll on the neighborhood. And probably the biggest expression of this was suddenly this lady moved in directly across the street. I still to this day cannot remember what her name was. I want to say Lupe. We called her the crazy lady. She had this huge mane of like red clown hair and lived in like a fortress. It was huge wrought iron bars, and this was not something that was common to the neighborhood. It looked like a fortress. There's white picket fences, and it was Leave It to Beaver up until that point. And there's this mechanical gate that opens and whatever. And we start hearing weird rumors about this lady, and there'd be weird people screaming at all hours of the night, and it was getting really bad. One night at 2:00 in the morning, the doorbell rings, and there's a guy who's like, "Oh, please call the cops. Please call the cops." The guy was bleeding out. He had been stabbed in our driveway. Like, this is the kind of stuff that slowly starts to happen. By 1995, like, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. There were Sundays when we'd come back from church or whatever, and the whole street was blocked off and by police. And we're like, what's going on? Oh, there's a standoff over there. It's no big deal. You can go around. You can go in. We had to beg the cops to get into our house, but we had to go through the neighbors behind us. And we had to go through their house, jump our fence, and go into our house that way. And like, they told us to duck and keep away from windows. There was a standoff with police at this woman's house. So it was getting more and more ridiculous. The only people she hated more than white people were other Mexicans. It was crazy. Like, there's a Mexican fellow that my dad used to carpool to his school. And I'll never forget, one day she just put a bunch of dog turds on the hood of his car because he wouldn't stop, while he was picking my dad up. He wouldn't stop briefly for a minute and a half parking in front of her house. She just crazy. And they wind up having this big audible argument in Spanish. Anyways, there were occasions where she threw bleach in a guy's eyes. Pretty sure it was a drug lieutenant. Anyways, we wind up moving out of that neighborhood. It was unlivable at a certain point. And moved to a totally different neighborhood. About a year, maybe a year and change later, we're watching the news. Standoff with Phoenix police in South Phoenix neighborhood. And we see images of this fortress. By the way, it's been torn down now. It's an empty lot. So whatever happened at this place, they couldn't sell the property thereafter, which is saying something in Phoenix with all the fleeing Californians. They couldn't even sell this place. So standoff with police, whatever, had to be gassed out of her home. And we see this woman being dragged, and it's her. We see the shock of red mane, and we're like, it's this woman. She got in an actual firearms related standoff with police and had to be gassed from her home. And you can see them dragging her by her arms and feet. I'll never forget it, into the police car. Crazy.
Yeah, in Canada, we only do that with pastors at this point. Forget the drug dealers.
Right. Over in Canada. Sorry. Get out! I love that video. Anyways, so in the weeks to follow, they do follow-up stories on it because it was totally out of left field. And they get into this woman's house, and there's a whole network of underground compartments in there. There had been people showing up at her house at all hours of the night. We knew something sketchy was going on there. I would accidentally, I love baseball. Even as a kid, I used to throw balls, and every now and then it would go in her yard. I wouldn't even ask to go get it. You know what I mean? Because you didn't know what was going on over there. She had chickens back there. It was crazy. So they get in there. There's underground compartments. There's dormitories. So she's trafficking, it turned out, illegal aliens, weapons, and drugs the whole time. Basically a safe house for illegals. And this was happening directly across the street in what had been a formerly idyllic neighborhood. This is kind of how it affects on the United States side. Beyond billboards that aren't in English and all of the obvious identifiers, these are the kinds of things that happen on the American side. But on the Mexican side, it wasn't until I did volunteer work there, which I did a couple of times, that I was like, wow, like, I'm never going to take, we have to sympathize for these poor people seriously from the Democrats again. Because this is a situation that they've propped up. When I went to Mexico the first time to volunteer, it was on the outskirts of Tijuana. There was no zoning laws there, so they couldn't do trash pickup, right? So you're driving to the site, the shantytown essentially, and there's just refuse. And I'm not talking like just trash, like bathtubs, like a commode, you know what I mean? Like, just, they throw any old thing, and they just I guess they would have government trucks just show up and push it off to the side of the street, because it was pretty orderly. And there'd be dog corpses, and I hope just dog corpses, just on the sides of the streets while you're going in there. In fact, there was a dog corpse that was there that we started calling Cujo every day on the way down. Eventually he got bloated and he deflated. It was a shame. But anyways, so we go to the shantytown. There's people living in shacks built out of fallen down billboards. You're building a house for these people, and one entire wall of their house is a Pepsi logo. You know what I mean? And it's just like,
but Razor, explain to people, how old are you, and how do you get into volunteering in Mexico?
I did volunteer work every single summer for a long stretch there. I started in like 97. My last major volunteer work was like maybe 07, 08 or something. I did stuff in Japan. I did stuff in Mexico, did some stuff in the States too. I volunteered in San Fran, which is, you want to know how effed up, the San Fran situation has been with homeless and such. I mean, it was terrible in 1998. It's only gotten worse since then. I could tell stories for days on that. But like, when I went for the first time, it was just shanty towns. It was whatever. I went back, and the first thing we're told from our guide, and mind you, this is like 2 years later, just 2 years later. And I think it was after Bush had done something on immigration. He'd done some kind of, did he ever pass amnesty or talk about passing amnesty or something?
He was trying to. The Council of Foreign Relations had suggested integrating the labor markets of Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. And along those lines, he was putting in the original stages of that. In fact, one of the people that was connected to that committee work was actually Ted Cruz's wife, but that's another story.
Yeah. So the second time we go down, we shack up with the volunteer group that we're going to be with. And the first thing they tell us is, okay, guys, you need to understand something. The Zetas, I think it was the Zetas, put out a hit on the local police chief about 18 hours ago. They carried it out. They put out a hit on a police chief and got away with it.
What's the Zetas for me who doesn't know?
Big cartel. Not such a big deal now. I think they were kind of cracked down on, but they were a huge deal.
Crazy for a while.
Really crazy. Yeah. They carry out a hit on the mayor of a Mexican city at one point of like
they were doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, it first went bad back when they shot the priest and all that stuff, but it returned bad in 06, 07, 08. I mean, like you couldn't go to Cancun for a while. I mean, if you drove outside of the resorts, you'd see heads on stakes. I mean, that's a good cinematic version of this. Somewhat captures it. Not the Oliver Stone one; is a little too dark. But the one that's cinematic, that's effective, is really Sicario in the sequel.
And a good one, actually, the broad who used to bang James Cameron. She did a documentary, Cartel Land.
That'll yes, very good.
That'll give you a good overview of what I'm talking about here. So right there, first thing. Oh yeah, by the way, they just killed the police chief. And don't go near the overpass. There was a mass hanging.
Yes, that's like because that's what the cartel would do to send a signal. After they killed somebody, they would hang them over the overpass for everybody to witness.
Yeah, and I'm just like, all right. Okay, so matters have taken a turn here. Gotcha. And here's the worst part. You'd go to the site to build for these people, and these people are living on mountains of trash. You'd literally be digging their first baño, literally a hole in the ground, and setting foundation for their home. And on the way there, you'd pass a 3-story palatial estate with full surveillance and a team of dogs and armed security. And it was like, okay, best of times, worst of times. Got that? That is Mexico. That is Mexico. And what you realized when you were there, and you actually get to meet the people who are wonderful. They're absolutely amazing. I'm building a house for these people. They have nothing. And while I'm laying the foundation, I think we were pounding the door frame, not the door frame, but the like wooden frame you have to lay down before you lay in the concrete. I think I was nailing that together. And I feel a tap on my shoulder, the family that, you were hooked up with a family that you built the house for. And it was just a young father and a young mother and a very, very young little girl that they had just had. She was maybe like 2 or 3. I think her name was Laura. And I feel a tap on my shoulder. And I turn around and it's the little girl. It's the little girl and she's holding up a tortilla. They had made us tortillas. They have nothing. These people have a dirt floor. They had made us tortillas for everybody. And it was like, oh man, like these people deserve so much better than they're getting. And you realize in that moment, for every one family that the Democrats help to live in an elevated form of poverty in the United States by keeping the borders open, there's 15 families who have to live in Mexico, and their situation gets worse by the minute. Their misery compounds by the minute because the corrupt regime that's in power stays in power, because in a normal situation with a non-porous border where they're not using the border with the United States as a political pressure valve to release revolutionary sentiment, what would happen is if they couldn't flee to the United States, they would eventually either revolt against the government or they would have a political revolution that would be so extreme it could easily be mistaken for an armed revolution. Basically, they would have to address the corruption that they haven't addressed in decades. And it's not happening because they have this constant out. Anytime there's some mass killing and the pressure starts to build up, just release the valve, let a bunch of illegals flee into the United States. And you can understand now why the Joe Biden administration is so caustic on that level, because it's going to deepen the misery, not just of the United States, but also very much, and probably to an even greater degree, of Mexico. My question in that video was, does Mexico not have a right to be a great nation as well? Like, are we the only country that gets to be live on livable streets, or are we just going to use these people as glorified serf labor and pretend that we're doing it in the name of compassion because we want to use these people as glorified vote farms? Like,
and
come on.
You said it in your video, on paper, no reason why Mexico should be anything but a flourishing country, natural resources, tourism, history, culture. Look, people may disagree with your analysis, but it's a compelling point of view regardless. And from someone who's been on the ground and not from someone who, is relegated to Washington, D.C. and and that environment. I was just impressed actually that you had so much history and experience of volunteer work. It's not something most people would do.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a coincidence that one of the people who led on this issue of border security was who? Joe Arpaio. Looking at Joe Arpaio's career, he was a liaison to Mexico for years. He actually has firsthand knowledge of what is going on in Mexico and what's informing it. Now, initially, he opposed the Arizona immigration law. Actually, he was more on Napolitano's side. But slowly over time, he was like, you know what? This kind of jives with my life experience, and this is probably something that needs to happen. And he started to enforce it. But these kind of people get demonized. You know, the Sheriff Joe, people were paying for billboards out here with Sheriff Joe with a swastika on his forehead and all kinds of shit. Like this was stuff that happened at the time. It's the people with real world experience who recognize like what's going on in this country and what actually unchecked, untrammeled illegal immigration is doing, not just to us, but to Mexico itself.
What do you think's happening in Arizona politics? Is it people moving in? Is it the younger generation shifting?
People think that it's, we need to worry about illegal immigrants and they're shifting the state blue. I mean, if you look demographically, our demographics really haven't shifted that much. It's a slow thing. Really, it's legal immigration from California and from Illinois and from Detroit, and that's what's going to get you. And you could address that very simply. You know, you could look, we've passed enough stupid laws in this state. You could just make it slightly more unappealing to come here. I don't think legalizing marijuana is going to do that. I think that's probably going to make Arizona even more inviting for Californians. There's an immediate bluing effect that occurs in every state that legalizes marijuana. Look at Colorado. That's the state that gave us Tom Tancredo, folks. How are they doing these days? How are they doing? Morally, I don't oppose pot. I even think it's probably a good pain medication, but politically, I think it creates worse symptoms than it alleviates, honestly. So yeah, I mean, I think that's what's occurring. Plus, we've had a very, very corrupt. There was something that happened after Goldwater left politics, which that's really what I am at the end of the day. I'm a Goldwater Republican. Is that I think after Goldwater went away, McCain took over. And that was kind of the in for a Democratic Party that couldn't get arrested in Arizona. Probably the apotheosis of this is that we had a gubernatorial election in 2002, I think. And that was where Janet Napolitano, who wound up being the director of Homeland Security. By the way, anyone watching out in Boston, you can thank her for the Boston bombing. She had them both on a list and said, nah, not so much. Anybody dead there can go ahead and thank Janet Napolitano for that one. But she got
was my favorite governor to sue. I'd sued her repeatedly because she would be so blatant at wanting to keep people off the ballot, discriminate against petition circulators, discriminate against political petition people, hated Ralph Nader in particular.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all of that jazz.
Oh, look what she did to the Viper militia. Look what she did to them. Oh, man, she was a prince. But anyway, she's basically the Janet Reno of the desert, for those who don't know. She kind of was. She did the false flag Viper militia stuff in 96. It was ridiculous. But anyways, so she's running against milk toast rhino guy named Matt Salmon. Talk about a name for a dead fish. So this guy, he's part of the LDS Church, which is always a challenge with a Republican because a lot of evangelicals consider Mormonism a cult. So they will never vote for one. That was a challenge Mitt Romney had that no one wanted to talk about. But Matt Salmon was always going to have that challenge. But I think he still would have run away with it if this hadn't happened. So she runs against Matt Salmon. It's not looking good for her. Now, mind you, she's a Democrat in the Arizona mold. I'm tougher on crime than the Republican. Look up Janet Napolitano, Joe Arpaio sometime. They were political allies. Tons of photos of them together. She shacked up with Arpaio to try and bolster her tough on crime image so she didn't seem like such a Democrat. So this guy shows up. She's doing terribly in polling. Suddenly a guy pops up by the name of Rick Mahoney, and he makes all the rounds. He ignores mainstream media. He's making all the rounds on all the conservative talk stations, all the conservative media. He's making sure to be there. And he's speaking their language. Flat tax, talking about less gun laws. We're going to do away with the emissions law. It's going to be all about liberty and conservatism and all. And he's independent. He's running as an independent. So he's drawing votes away from Matt Salmon. So she gets into office. She gets into office because the ticket is split in a red state. Anyways, comes out years later, pictures of her with Rick Mahoney at Democratic fundraisers. He's a Democratic operative. He was a Democrat his entire life. He's from California, Democratic operative. They just threw him into the mix to split the ticket and usher Napolitano into the governor's mansion. And that created a lot more problems down the line. But this is, guys, you don't understand. This was a red state. You could not get elected if you were a Democrat. So this was kind of the way that they gradually eased in, and unfortunately the McCains of the world helped them do it. You know, they weakened the Republican Party at the same time that the Democrats were sort of positioning themselves as, oh, we're just we're just Republicans with a D next to our name, essentially. And that's the mold that Kyrsten Sinema is running on. That's the mold that Mark Kelly's running on. I ask this question every time, you know, if the state is actually going that blue, again, demographically, we haven't shifted that much, then why did they not list Democrat on their campaign signs? Why are they running why is the first major political statement that Mark Kelly makes in the election cycle, I voted for a Republican 2 cycles ago. You know, I'm a gun owner. They're out conservative-ing their opponents. You know, this is what they're doing. And they didn't help their case by running McSally, who just has high negatives for whatever reason. She just does. She's not a bad person. Her political record in terms of voting is actually excellent. But people just hate her. They hate her guts. She has that nasally, like, problem officer kind of, you know what I mean? She's that wine mom thing going on. Whereas Kyrsten Sinema, they hide all of her negatives. They don't mention that she's listed as a donor in the official organ of record for the Communist Party USA. They don't talk about her bashing her own, citizens and such. So they kind of get away with this. And I think the Democrats have set up some theater too on a national level to protect them. Guys, if you think it is an accident that Donald Trump is talking about immigration or whatever he's talking about at the State of the Union a couple years ago, and the cameras just happened to cut to Kyrsten Sinema clapping away. This is the same woman who voted for his impeachment twice. We're supposed to buy that she's loving what he's talking about. Shut up. The Democrats, they censured her for a reason. They want to protect her in her home state. That's all that is. That's political theater. This woman is an avowed leftist. You look at her voting record, Jeff Flake voted with Donald Trump more often than Kyrsten Sinema, guys. It's ridiculous. So, yeah, I think that's what's going on fundamentally, sort of an overview.
Now, are you following any of the Arizona audit?
Yes, and I'm in contact with a lot of people who are doing that. There's several things you have to understand about the audit. First off, there's no signature match in it.
That's what I saw. See, I was involved behind the scenes with some of the first Kelly Ward election contest challenges. And so was trying to help them orchestrate it, organize it, direct it. I wanted it focused on the signature match issue because we can look at the recent California gubernatorial recall. 20% of the signatures were rejected. You're telling me that somehow magically 99.5% of those signatures now match everywhere else? And that this in Arizona, I've been through many signature match challenges. I've represented everybody across the political spectrum in Arizona to have the right to the Green Party. It's the Democrats who fight the hardest against the Greens getting on the ballot. But everyone else. But they fight those petitions like crazy. They usually reject 40 to 50% of signatures. So the idea that suddenly there was this massive wave of mail-in signatures. Arizona's the one state where the guy that moved to Nashville said, I don't know how they said I voted in Arizona because I didn't vote in Arizona. It was one of the best documented, substantiated cases of a vote being counted, and the dimwit governor certified an election that included his vote being cast after he said that wasn't his vote. So the signature matches struck me as critical and essential. Couldn't convince people down there to stick with it. all the crazy computer machine stuff that I thought was just a red herring and a rabbit trail. Even if it was true, you weren't likely to prove it, and I didn't see evidence to support it.
Well, and Rusty Bowers was really opposing that hardcore, and actually, there's a big push now to delay the end of session. What is it called? Cine DA or whatever. Rusty. The two guys that you need to that honestly need to be persuaded to basically do that are Rusty Bowers. I don't think you'll have a sympathetic ear there, but he needs to feel the pressure, honestly. And a lady by the name of Karen Fan. Those two right there are probably going to be key to delaying that, and that's going to be key to actually hopefully turning this into an actual audit.
Because right now they're not going to match the signatures.
Yep. Right now they're not. I believe Kelly Ward even came right out and said something to the effect of, it was never within the scope of the audit. And it's like, well, what's the point then? I mean, okay, if you're establishing chain of custody, that is in a sense
there's nice things to it, but it's not where the big evidence is.
Exactly. And when somebody actually made a chart I saw on Twitter where they were, I forget what it was. I think it was a sample of votes in Georgia, maybe. And it wasn't even from this election. And all it was it listed by category, all of the instances of ballots being thrown out for either being filled out in error or being fraudulent or whatever, right? In that particular election cycle. And they actually had them enumerated, right? So they had the numbers side by side of each individual cause why the ballots were thrown out. And the biggest number by a lot was signatures did not match. It was like almost 250,000. You know what I mean? It was a lot.
Oh, so, it was 20% plus in the New York primaries in 2020, 20% plus in certain New Jersey primaries. So, it was in Georgia in 2016. It was when there were far fewer questionable signatures. It had a much higher rejection rate. It's just the risk of human error is such that someone's not going to match it. Putting aside the fact that the number one way to capture a fraudulent ballot, according to the New York Times in 2012, in case YouTube is listening, that's of course what I'm referencing. I wouldn't ever reference the election fortification that took place in 2020.
Certainly not, honk honk.
Documented in the Times article, so it's totally legit mainstream news.
Right. Or the BBC. Exactly. The BBC who ran that article, features of a fraudulent election, and the 2020 election fit every one.
Incidentally, check. Go to back to California. Incidentally, when they were trying to, have a signature verification issue with Newsom's recall, what's the outcome? I mean, they reached the threshold. They're having the election.
Still reached the threshold, but they said over 20% didn't match. So it's like, and by the way, there's got to be some of those. I'm going to start suing in certain places to get their internal standards because they have a different set of standards for petitions than they applied in this last election. But so it sounds like there may be some good stuff that comes out of the Arizona audit, but the big stuff won't even be looked at.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is where there's a lot of election integrity bills being passed here now, which is good, but there's a little bit of chicanery going on there. You also have to understand any election integrity bills that are post-audit, they don't actually get passed in the current session. So they actually won't be effective for the next election. And that is something to keep in mind. Because one of the things that people are really worried about is, okay, it'd be great if Republicans were able to punish Biden for some of the things he's doing right now, but are the elections even going to be secure by next election cycle? This is kind of telling you it may not. So I think the big prevailing behind the stuff that I'm hearing behind the scenes is there's a lot of Republicans who are worried that it'll just wind up being bread and circuses.
Well, I mean, that is what it looks like by and large, by all the accounts coming out of it. It's going to come and go, and nothing will come out of it, which is going to reinforce certain beliefs and certain narratives. And
they've got those narratives preloaded too. Like if they found a bunch of fraud, that narrative would still be forthcoming from the media. It would just be less credible. You know what I mean? Right. So, but here is some positive news. And I'm not sure how legit this is. I'm a little skeptical of this just across the board, having heard about the signature match thing. But Senator Kelly Townsend gave a speech saying that they think they have secured, they've actually managed to delay the session. So hopefully they'll be able to do that. But that's important for actually getting election security bills going forward, which I think is the most important thing. I think the audit is less important. The audit, honestly, is more of a symbolic thing. I think if it goes well, it could possibly trigger more in other states. I think that's the primary value of it, because you're not going to overturn the election with it, even if it shows. I mean, Biden and Trump in the state of Arizona are separated by what, less than 10,000 votes? I mean, that's nothing. They're auditing millions of votes. So very good chance, actually. Very, very good chance, actually, that it could be flipped. But that doesn't mean the election gets flipped over. The primary utility of it is, wow, look what they found. Georgia, you should probably get on that. And there's already little movements here and there in those swing states to talk about doing their own. So that's kind of the reason I don't want it to descend into a comedy of errors. I'd prefer for it to come off at least like, okay, this is worth doing, right?
That's to my precedent that this should happen after every election that's contested. We should always have audits of our voting processes, always have audits of the ballot. We need more transparency, not less.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear the party that was literally, I mean, in the 2000 elections, some of the stories of what Al Gore's lawyers were up to. These guys like throwing out overseas military ballots. Like, really, guys? You're just chucking them out? And these are the guys who were like, how dare you? How dare you match signatures? Guys, you were looking at hair fibers on the ballots in 2000, and now we're supposed to pretend. Come on. Please. You notice Al Gore's not out front on this election security stuff.
He's Al Gore in a long time. He's busy cashing in. Al's been busy cha-ching, and catching up with his latest masseuse.
Right. Well, jet fuel doesn't pay for itself.
True.
Now, Razorfist, I don't know if you've done a rage video on this yet. In fact, I suspect you haven't. It just happened today or yesterday. What might be a good way to end this? What do you think of Rep. Liz Cheney, the treatment of her, what happened to her politically, and her amazing statement afterwards that she's going to do whatever it takes to keep Donald Trump as far away from the Oval Office as possible?
She's like, I can't believe an Arizona Republican found their way all the way up to Wyoming. Like it's McCain 101, guys. Like it's pure McCain, like vindictive, not just establishment politics, but like vindictive, conniving establishment politics. It really is. I'm insulated from electoral oversight. She already got elected just by having an R next to her name in a red state. Wyoming, my broadcast partner on my podcast is from Wyoming, and on the ground, they are not pleased with her. And that's my only real regret, thanks to the 17th Amendment, which is a complete abrogation of the Constitution, in my opinion. Thanks to the 17th Amendment, there's no real oversight for senators and congressmen. There's no real recall process, and there frankly needs to be. There used to be, I believe it used to work that like state senates and state houses could censure or could recall a senator. Yeah. That needs to be the case again.
What is the 17th Amendment exactly for those of us?
Direct election of U.S. senators instead of through the state legislatures.
Yes. Yeah. So back then, the state house and state senate could actually they could recall, or I guess it would technically be an impeachment or something, a sitting senator or representative. And look, that's just accountability. Every branch of government is supposed to have checks and balances. This is a check without a balance, folks. That's all it is, and that needs to change, honestly, because we've got these little autocrats in some of these states that do not fear reprisal and either have the election so rigged or the media so in their pocket they know they'll never get voted out. I mean, and you can tell in the tone in their voice. To return to Arizona for a minute, John McCain, I'll never forget I don't think it was the 2016 election. I think it was the election before that when he was running against J.D. Hayworth. And he ran this clown shoes ad, where he was at the border and he's like, all right, my friends, it's time to complete the danged fence. That's what we need to do. We don't need a wall. We need to complete the danged fence. And then he gets reelected and wins his primary. And Does nothing. It tells his voters, he winds up being in an interview calling his voters the crazies. And what this is the kind of stuff that happens when you don't fear any reprisal at all. You know what I mean? This is the kind of thing that was never supposed to happen. We were never supposed to have a political class in this country, for one thing. But second of all, like that's just the sort of thing that happens when there's no sort of Damocles hanging over your head.
Speaking of reprisals, we talked about sort of Gamergate in the context of the pushback that happened there. We're seeing some of it now, pushback on behalf of Gina Carano, seeing some great the film Nobody that one of the commenters referenced earlier, great film. Great film. It's in the John Wick style. What do you look forward to currently, either in the gaming world, cinematic world, that gives you hope that that's going to rebound from this sort of against this woke revolution?
I like Trump. I like Trump a lot. I think he has very real flaws, but I think Trump not being in the White House gives people less of a target, shrinks the size of the targets for virtue signaling for a lot of people. I think Hollywood's reaction, you notice the moment there's almost, we should mark it like BT and AT, like before Trump and after Trump with Hollywood. That really after 2016 with video games, with films, with books, with comic books, everything. It was like everyone was like, whoa! They all ramped up the propaganda. It existed before, but I feel like it intensified after Trump was a public figure. And you could really see it just gradually happen. So I think that kind of does that a little bit. And in that connection, there's some projects that are going on. We were just talking about Solomon Kane. I was talking to the guys at Midnight's Edge, great channel about like movie news and stuff. By the way, I was talking with them. They know the guy who owns Conan, the Robert E. Howard stuff, Conan, Solomon Kane, all that stuff. And apparently now there is a Solomon Kane TV series that's in the works that I'm excited about. I'm like, oh my gosh, I worry that it could be wokeified, but the guy who runs it isn't really particularly woke and has been greenlighting all these bloody, violent, manly kind of projects in the Conan sphere. So if he applies that to Solomon Kane, I think it could be cool. The other cool tidbit about that was I heard that I don't know if you've seen the show Sherlock, Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh, yes.
Right? It's going to be kind of in that vein, like mini movies. It's going to be like that. And there'll be maybe 4 of them. And they'll release them 4 or 5 at a stretch and so forth. So I'm excited about that. Man, in the video game sphere, it's tough. There's a video game that just came out that I still haven't played. Got it. And I'm really excited about it, called Hood Outlaws and Legends. It's like a game where you play as like Robin Hood and his merry men kind of, and you're carrying out heists in medieval England. It's really cool, actually, a cool premise, and you're competing against other teams of thieves and carrying out these heists against the Sheriff of Nottingham. So kind of a cool idea, actually, and I'm looking forward to getting into that. But other than that, I don't know, man. There's not a whole lot. My 2 favorite series are Deus Ex and Thief, and I think they're well and truly dead for at least a little while until they revive them. Deus Ex is a great Cyberpunk series. By the way, anyone wants to get red-pilled via a video game, go play the original Deus Ex. That game was prophecy. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but it came out in 2000, a year before 9/11, and predicted 9/11.
Wow.
A year before it. And it's all about political conspiracies and authoritarianism and FEMA being used to take over the country. And it's crazy. It was made to like parody Y2K paranoia, kind of. And it wound up becoming real life. So it's kind of loony. So,
and, let's say, Razor, before we wind this up, where can people find you, and what are your plans for the future on your various social media? And will we be seeing you at razorfist.locals.com?
I haven't opened to locals yet, but I'd love to. I've just started. So I just opened a channel on a cool platform called Unauthorized. It's like an uncensored video platform. That's where I do my podcast, The Razor Force Offensive. On YouTube, I'm youtube.com. What is it? /C/ the Rageaholic. I hate those stupid shortened URLs. They drive me up the wall, but whatever. Well done, Google, on that one. No, don't preserve me / the Rageaholic. Preserve me /C. Thanks, a-hole. But anyway, so That's where you can get me on YouTube. I'm also at the-rageaholic.tumblr.com. I use it as a blog website, actually. I know Tumblr has a bit of a reputation, but I just use it as a blogosphere. So that I also do the Shadowcast if you want to hear me talk about old school 40s pulps. I love doing that. I do that like once a month. And I have my own pulp that came out. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can grab it real quick.
Yeah, it's...
There we go.
I'll wait until he gets back.
It's called The Long... there we go. It's called The Long Moonlight. And it's a fantasy, is a dark fantasy noir is what it is. It's about a thief, actually, in a medieval fantasy, kind of low fantasy world in the middle of a gang war. So it's like if Lord of the Rings was on street level and there was a gang war going on. It's kind of like it's inspired by the novel Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett. So it's kind of like that. It's a little bit Fistful of Dollars, Yojimbo kind of. He plays both sides.
Where's it? I mean, they can get it online, but is it available on Amazon?
It is on Amazon, yes. Doing insanely well. I'm like blown away by how well it's doing. And I got the next one already written, working on later drafts or whatever, just trying to fine tune it. And that'll be coming pretty soon here, actually, and that'll be on nightvalenovels.com. So whenever that comes out.
Amazing. So, Razor, stick around, and then I'm going to ask you to send me all these links so I can put them in the pinned comment. What I love about this, first of all, I knew that you were a nice guy, notwithstanding the rage, because even your rage was good-natured in its delivery and its style. And what's amazing is that you are always going to have insights because you have a highly functioning brain behind there. Regardless of what's going on, the rage is going to be fine-tuned and insightful to what's going on in the news, and it's going to get people aware. And so if anybody doesn't already know you, go back and check out some of the stuff. It's amazing. But we can do this again in the future as things come up. And I think everyone loved the discussion. I know Robert did. I see people in the chat saying Robert is in seventh heaven right now. But this was amazing.
I'm a big fan of Robert Barnes. By the way, with the high back chair and the cigar, I feel like all you're missing is the monocle and the white Persian cat right now. Actually,
exactly. And for those who haven't seen
laser on the moon, but
exactly for those who haven't seen it, definitely do go watch Cobra. It's one of my favorite films. All the great '80s action films, real films, the great '70s films, great films. And for the after party, I will be at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
And I'm going to try to make my way in there once I put some kids to bed and clean up some dog crap, which I know is up there. Razor,
and put them to sleep watching maybe some Dirty Harry movies or Death.
Yes, Magnum 4. What's your favorite Dirty Harry movie of the whole series? We got 5 movies. What's the best one?
Yeah, I thought the last one was kind of so. Wasn't Jim Carrey in the last one?
He was in the last one, and so was Liam Neeson. It's crazy.
Ooh. I love Liam Neeson. I mean, Taken is still top notch, though. The John Wick series and nobody's very good.
Yeah,
probably the first one is still my favorite.
It's a classic. I think I'm going with Magnum Force.
Yeah, that was a good
one. That was a great one.
We had JD Vance on of Hillbilly Elegy, and his mama loved the 44 Magnum because of Dirty Harry.
I've got the same frame but a different gun. I've got the Smith & Wesson Model 25-3. So it's the same gun, but it's in 45 Colt. So I've got the Dirty Harry gun.
There you go.
I got a paintball gun somewhere. I'm Canadian, eh?
All right, move to Calgary. You could have some. You're all right.
But it's still Canada, strictly for hunting. I mean, but by and large, I mean it's interprovincial, but it's a different ideology up here.
Yeah.
Discussion for another day. But now, stick around. We're going to say our proper goodbyes. Everyone in the chat, thank you very much for coming. Share this away. Check out Razorfist. You won't regret it, even if it burns the ears with the swear words. But it's good stuff. It's what stand-up comedy should be, and it's what news should be, and it's how learning should be for those who are old enough to hear some dirty words. But Razor, thank you very much. Robert, thank you very much. Everyone in the chat, stick around. See you all soon.